Okay. Uh, okay. So I will remind us a little bit of what we have done previously. It was a long time ago before Hanukkah. We had been discussing how the oneness of Hashem, understanding, a deeper understanding of the oneness of Hashem, has something to do with dealing with heresy in the sense of people are understanding something deeper. The religion itself is presenting itself in not in such a great way. One second. Here. Okay. Uh, and it caused all kinds of people uh, to lose their faith in Hashem, in God. For instance, if religion presents itself as something that wants to weaken people, and people in the world today are free and have strength to do all and the freedom to do all kinds of things. So religion has to understand that the positive aspect of that and work with that. Otherwise, you're going to lose people. And even though fear of punishment is part of religion, it's not the main part, it's not the main focus. And if you understand these kinds of things, or if you see religion as fighting against all kinds of things that we have in our lives, you don't understand that religion is there to sanctify them, to make them deeper and refine them, rather than object to them, then we get people not able to function within the way religion presents itself. And it's not against the concept of religion, it's against the way it's being carried out. And therefore, it causes a lot of trouble. And if we understand that, then the way we relate to other people, to people who present themselves as heretics and so on, will be very different. And maybe we can help them reconcile or find themselves within a religious framework. So it's not only about myself. Faith in Hashem is not only about myself, but to think about what is it that the world needs at this time in history, at this time in human development, and how do we go about creating that? That's our responsibility to try and help that progress, to help that grow and move forward. And now what we're going to see, first of all, I'd like to point out the following. Let me once again share the screen. Here we are. See, these are from a notebook where it says Kovetz Aleph in Hebrew. That means it's notebook A. There are 8 notebooks, that there are more, but there were, at some point, there were 8 notebooks that were publicized of HaRav Kook's spontaneous writing. Here, I have it right here. I'll even open this one. So it's, you see, it says, and as I've said before, he just poured his soul, his mind out onto paper, and he drifted to all kinds of different thoughts and ideas. And here you have Tafshin Samechet, which is just a number, 765. And look at this. This is 766. And this is 767. And this is 768. Meaning there was a day somewhere around 1904, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, around those years. One day, Rav Kook was thinking about this issue of faith and heresy, and he just wrote them down. Here you have it. Tafshin Samech Hey, Tafshin Samech Vav, Tafshin Samech Zayin, Tafshin Samech Het. So he did put down 4 paragraphs dealing with the same issue, and before that he was writing about something else, and after that he moved on to something else. But he did have these 4 paragraphs together. And what I would like to do is to take a quick look at all 4 of them, and then if I mean, the Chevra here have it on paper, but I can try and make it smaller, and maybe you can see 2 at a time. I don't know if that's good for you to make it smaller. Then it's hard to see 2 at a time. Maybe, not really. If I make it real small, then you can see two at a time. Even that, not so easily. So I don't know if it's such a good idea. But let's do it one at a time. Let's just leave it at that. Okay. And then we'll put one and one together. Here's the first one. They're short paragraphs, relatively. Sometimes a heretic may be found who possesses a strong inner radiant faith, flowing from the source of supreme holiness, even more than thousands of people of, I would like to call it, small faith. I'll explain in a moment. This applies both to individual people and to entire generations. And regarding all of them, it is said, the righteous shall live by his faith. Tzaddik be'emunato yichyeh. It's a pasuk in HaRav Kook. Let's just mention something about little faith, small faith. The original translation that I got was something else. The term in Hebrew is ktanei amana. Ktanei amana, people with small faith. And I think that I would like to use the term small, meaning not little faith, not little in quantity, because I think little can suggest that maybe he only has a little bit of faith. I think what it means is it's a small faith. Faith in God can be something small, not undeveloped, not deep, or it can be something which is lofty, which has beauty. And in that sense, sometimes you have a lot of people, thousands of people who have small faith. These are religious people. You ask them, do you believe in God? Of course I believe in God. And they have a lot to say about it. But the truth is, says HaRav Kook, that their faith is small. It's not deep. And sometimes you will find a heretic who has a strong inner radiant faith. And it flows from some supreme source of holiness. And his faith, to be honest, is greater than all these thousands of people with small faith. This applies both to individual people and this is fascinating, to an entire generation. Wow. There can be a generation where the way they perceive themselves is that they're heretics. But the truth is that they're just rejecting the small faith of the religious people. And so they're not carrying out the mitzvot because they think they're heretics. But really what they have is some inner faith. But that's not the religious framework. The religious authorities look down on them and their faith because it doesn't bring them to carrying out mitzvot. So they push them away and they say about themselves, no, we don't have faith, because what they identify is something, sometimes you use words. I read a book once, thanks to my mother, a book called My Stroke of Insight. Anyone know the book? It's a woman who was a brain scientist who had a stroke at age 37. And because she was a brain scientist, she identified that she was having a stroke. And then her recovery took her 8 years to recover. And she wrote a book about it, describing the experience she had, call it hemorrhage, bleeding in her left brain, which is the analytical brain. So she was all into her right brain, which is the how do you say that puts things together? Sorry, the opposite of to analyze, which is to separate. It's to to integrate. Yeah, it integrates. It's like a oneness. And she describes this amazing experience of oneness with the world. And it's because the brain loses its ability to identify and analyze and separate. And it's hard to separate yourself from the wall next to you. And, everything becomes kind of a oneness. She says she developed an ability to decide which brain she wants to be in at any time. She wants to be studying science and working on her science. That's her left brain. She wants to move into her right brain. Once she experienced it, she says, I can move into my right brain and experience this, maybe not on the same level. But so in the book, she uses all kinds of terms for that oneness. Call it God, call it this, call it that. I don't remember the terms of, a whole, like 8 different terms for different people. Call it chakra, call it, something from India, something from the East, and all kinds of names. So that's what I'm thinking of. People who have this kind of very radiant faith. as some great oneness, but they call it something else. And if you tell this to a Jewish religious rabbi, he says, what's this nonsense? There's Shabbat and there's Kashrut and you have to keep all the rules. That's faith. And so he pushes them away. They get pushed away. They move away. You don't have to blame the rabbi necessarily. They drift away. They identify themselves as not having faith, where the truth is, says HaRav Kook, that the religious people might have small faith and it's good enough for them to keep the mitzvot. And this person has something which is much stronger and intrinsic, but they don't identify it as that. And this can be true of a generation. Wow. And then he quotes the pasuk, Tzadik be'emunato yichyeh. Everybody today who discusses this pasuk says that people misquote the pasuk. Today in Hebrew, in Israel, people quote the pasuk, Ish be'emunato yichyeh. What they mean to say is absolute liberalism. Everybody can believe in whatever they want. That's certainly not what the pasuk is saying. The pasuk calls the person who has faith a tzaddik, a righteous person. And the righteous person lives by his faith. First of all, I will comment, but this is in parentheses, that emunah in Tanakh, I don't think means faith. It means aminut. It means being honest and trustworthy. And tzaddik be'emunato yichyeh means that tzaddik, a righteous person, is an honest, trustworthy, consistent person. But anyhow, let's take it the way we use the word emunah today and say that a tzaddik is a person who lives within his faith. And the HaRav Kook is saying sometimes the heretic is a greater tzaddik living in his faith than some people who keep mitzvot but have small faith. And sometimes this is true of a generation. And I think HaRav Kook is saying about his generation, I come to Eretz Yisrael, I see these immigrants, these olim, who have come to Eretz Yisrael and they want to make Am Yisrael great. And they want to be very moral, and they have all these lofty ideas, but they're not religious. Maybe they're anti-religious. Maybe religious is perceived by them as something which is primitive and nitty-gritty, interested in all kinds of unimportant details, and they're into something else. And HaRav Kook is saying about them that the truth is that your values come from an inner radiant faith in the value of the world that God created. And there's something greater about your faith than of those religious people keeping mitzvot. Okay? Well, let's go to see a second one, and then we'll make a break. Next one. This was, the first one was 765. This is 766. Now, Kook keeps thinking and writing about similar matters. The inner spiritual matters upon which the sanctity of faith is founded are truly beyond all language, and all spoken expressions offer only a faint and limited shadow of them. You can't really speak about God, about the source of the sanctity and the religion. The inner spiritual matters upon which the sanctity of faith is founded are so inner that they're truly beyond all language. It's something more abstract. But we use language, we use expressions, we speak expressions about God, about God's connection to us, about how God oversees and providence and gives us the Torah, all kinds of expressions. And says HaRav Kook, all these spoken expressions really are just a faint and limited shadow of what those spiritual matters really are, truly are. At times, there are souls who perceive the shades of meaning conveyed through words in a completely inverted way, opposite to their true essence. And in such cases, their heresy is a form of genuine faith, like an inverted seal. An inverted seal means like you have a seal where you put it in ink and press it on something, on a paper or something else, and you get the seal in the proper direction, proper form. But the seal itself is opposite because you have to put it onto something and then it comes out the right way. It's like looking at a mirror, right? When you hold the book up to the mirror, you don't see it properly. It's kind of backwards, right to left instead of left to right, or left to right instead of right to left. So in that way, there are people who perceive the shades that we spoke about. The spoken expression is just faint and limited shadow of the true spiritual matters. And then there are people who understand that these are just shades of meaning, and they say, "Oh, this is nonsense." They belittle it. They say it's not true. I'm a rational person. I'm a modern person. I've grown in my ability to think. I've grown in my I'm an enlightened person in the modern world, and I know that that's nonsense. And the truth is that they may be right, because if people think of those shadows as the essence, then it's nonsense. But the truth is that they are just a reflection, an expression, a faint and limited shadow of true spiritual matters. But then once again, so sometimes it's the very so-called religious people who think that they understand faith and God and all the spiritual matters, and they have small faith. And then there are heretics who don't have great faith, but they've rejected the small faith. And who's closer to the truth? Those who rejected the small faith, or those who hold on to the small faith and are called believers, people of faith, or those who reject the small faith and they're called heretics? I'm going to take a break and have people make whatever comments they'd like to.
I'm confused.
I have a question.
Mark started. Let's let him continue, okay?
The first paragraph.
Yes.
I'm talking about a lot of people who have small faith. Namely, they have faith. It's not very deep, is what I've heard you say. And then there comes along a person who, is very holy and doesn't know exactly where maybe that comes from and doesn't follow all the mitzvot in the same way. Why then do we call that person a heretic? I'm confused.
Because he identifies himself. Mark is asking, going back to the first paragraph, I'll put it back up. Here. Mark is asking, why does the first person described in this paragraph, who has inner radiant faith flowing from the source of supreme holiness, why do we call him a heretic? And I'm trying to say we call him a heretic because he does not identify it as faith. I'm going back to HaRav Kook and his generation. He sees very idealistic Jews coming back to Eretz Yisrael and building the Jewish nation in Eretz Yisrael, but they come from a 19th century Europe that drifted very far away from religion and the frameworks of religion. And yet these people come with tremendous, deep values. They're willing to make sacrifices for these values. And they're willing to work very hard. One second. They're willing to work very hard in order to enable Am Yisrael to return to its strength in Eretz Yisrael. And they want Am Yisrael to be a light unto nations, not because of religious belief, not because of mitzvot, because of the Torah, because they want justice in the world and things like that. But that is not usually identified with faith in God. It's justice and morality is human values, not faith. So that he doesn't identify it as faith, and people relating to him don't identify him as a person of faith. But HaRav Kook says, I see in him some strong inner radiant faith that he doesn't even see in himself. And if I go to the second paragraph, then he rejects what other people think of as faith. And HaRav Kook says, I'm saying it's just a faint, limited shadow of faith. So he rejects it because he's right. It's not the true faith. It's just an expression. He's right for rejecting it, but no, he's not right for rejecting it. You should accept it as a form of expression and connection, but it's not the real faith. But he just rejects it because he sees something which is truthful. And again, going back to what is our role if we identify this kind of situation is not to reject this person and not to object to him and not to reprimand him and put him down, but to tell him, oh, you have such beautiful values. Why do you think they're not connected to God? Why don't you? But oh, of course, this person, what they wrote about understanding divine and godly intervention in the world, they don't understand it in depth. They're just expressing something which is very external, kind of a shadow, a weak shadow or a faint shadow. Where is the word, the term? It's a faint and limited shadow of lofty things. You're right, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means we have to understand it in a higher and deeper way. So instead of struggling against them because they don't have faith and they don't keep mitzvot, connect with them and understand, find a common ground where you can then say, okay, I hear what you're saying. That doesn't mean that you have to reject the Torah. You're rejecting a certain perspective of understanding of the Torah. That doesn't mean you have to reject the Torah. They say about a rabbi in Rehovot, or maybe about some different rabbis, about a rabbi in Rehovot named HaRav. No, I'm missing the name right now. It's not important right now. But that he would say to people who would say, I don't believe in God, and okay, what's God? And they would explain what is it that they don't believe in, and he would say, the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. But I have a different understanding or perspective about what is God. Yes, Vivakasha. Tova, you wanted to say something? Tova?
She's muted.
And I wanted to know, it says in your source, Ktanei Amana.
Yeah.
That's not possible. You sure? It has
Says
to
it.
be Ktanei Emunah, because Amana is a
No,
treaty.
no. Amana, it's an expression used in sources of Torah Shebe'al Peh. It means emunah. It's not the modern term of, or it's not
Amana,
the.
Amana
It's
is the
not the.
brit. It's a brit. It's a
I
chuzeh.
understand, like in Nehemiah, like we studied in
Right,
Nehemiah.
exactly. But
I
this is
understand, but it's
Ktanei
used.
Emunah.
But the term that is used in Torah Shebe'al Peh in this way is Ktanei Amana.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to
It
check.
means faith.
Okay, just
Go
checking.
ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
I think this would be much easier to understand if we have a common definition of the word heretic.
Okay. What I mean is that there's a person who understands himself. You ask him, do you believe in God and in the Torah? And he says no.
Mhm.
And then you start and then you start arguing with him or discussing with him, and somebody is trying, not you, somebody is trying to present him with some kind of understanding, and he's rejecting it. And sometimes, says HaRav Kook, what he's rejecting, what's being presented to him, and he's rejecting, he's right for rejecting. It's a small faith, and he's grown to a higher way of thinking. That doesn't mean that in that higher way of thinking there isn't a possibility to have faith in something which is a higher understanding or perspective or expression, even just the expression of what these spiritual matters, which are the foundation of religion, what are they? But he identifies it as rejection of the foundations of religion. So he understands himself as a person who doesn't believe in God and in the Torah and mitzvot.
I guess my confusion was that I've thought that to be a heretic, you really had to be a very well-educated person so that you know what you are denying.
Exactly.
You have to be able to understand something and deny it. Okay, but you grow up, person grows up, let's say, I'll give an example. You go to kindergarten and what's the term in English? The ganenet?
The kindergarten teacher.
Teacher. A kindergarten teacher? Okay.
right?
Because in Hebrew we use ganenet and morah.
Yeah.
You know, there's a one term for the kindergarten teacher, and another term for the school teacher. In any
Right.
case, so the kindergarten teacher tells children Torah stories, and God did this and God did that. And then a child grows up, you know, he goes to elementary school and he starts in fifth or sixth grade, he's starting to ask questions. And then he's 15 and he remembers what the kindergarten teacher told him. And he says, that's good. Those are fables. It's a good story for kids when you want to tell them something about the Jewish tradition and the festivals and things like that. But he says, you know, it's all nonsense. But did he have the opportunity to ever study about it in a higher, more abstract, more spiritual way? I have the sometimes the pleasure and privilege, and sometimes the frustration of teaching high school, and I teach girls post high school in midrasha, where they're very interested in studying and deepening their understanding. And sometimes, you know, sometimes in high school, like I said, high school is all kinds of experiences. I can remember once somebody throwing at me something about, I don't remember what the topic was, you know, against some religious belief. And I actually said to her, how much time have you dedicated to this issue that you're now saying that it's nonsense? And she said, none. So to which I responded, you know, I don't know if you can make a claim that it's nonsense if you haven't really given it any time and thought and effort. Maybe you need to discuss it. So since then, I go around with a statement that I say, if you have questions about, you know, I'm a rabbi, people come to me with why this, why that. If you have a question, are you staying around for the answer, or did you just want to throw the question at me and walk away? Because if you're just throwing the question at me and walking away, so fine, do your thing. That has nothing to do with me. If you want to talk to me, so stay around to try and discuss and understand and deepen a little bit. And it doesn't have to mean you have to stay for a whole week, but let's try for 10, 15 minutes. So this kid that I described before never had the opportunity. So he rejects things that he was told when he was a toddler. And when you're 15 or 18, and then I meet the girls when they're 18, and I try to get them to ask questions. They choose whether or not they come to my class, right? They don't have to come to any specific class. They can choose. So I give a class called in Hebrew, Challenges Facing Emunah, in Hebrew, Etgarei Emunah B'Yameinu, Challenges Facing Emunah in Our Times. And I say to them, I think it's good to ask the questions, to raise the questions. It helps you deepen, and you shouldn't be when you're 18 with the same faith that you had when you were in kindergarten or elementary school. So you have to ask the questions and discuss them and deepen your understanding. But if a person never had the opportunity to do that, then he's going to reject what he was taught. And he's right for rejecting what he was taught. And then he identifies himself as a heretic. And he stops, or he never started performing mitzvot. But it's not because he ever had an opportunity to see a deeper or more higher understanding of faith. So that's what HaRav Kook is saying about it. It can happen to a generation, because until the Enlightenment, until the how do you say, the Mapecha Atasiatit, the Industrial Revolution, and the and democracy, the French Revolution, and everything that happened after that, freedom and people, and there's industry, and there are new modern machines, and people have more time on their hands, and many more people are reading and writing and thinking and are become rational people. And since then, it's been a mashber,
Crisis.
a crisis for religion, for the churches, the Havdil and the Bate Knesset, that people are drifting away because it's not, and their grandparents from the 18th century and the rabbis from the 18th century were telling them, no, that's a very bad thing to do. But that wasn't very effective, that response. And the truth is that some of them, says HaRav Kook, that's why he says it applies both to individual people and to complete generations. Because because something happened in the last centuries that is very different than what we had before. The religion in previous centuries was not very deep and developed, and we didn't have an opportunity to deepen in our thinking of it, or not many people did. So when came around the 19th and 20th centuries, people moved away, but have they had the opportunity to hear a new understanding of, or a deeper or higher understanding of what faith is about? And so if they haven't, let's try and give it to them now. Let's try and spread it now. And some people in Israel are trying to do that. Okay?
So if we were to answer, or to try to answer Michael's question, what exactly will we say is a heretic? A heretic is somebody who has a deep faith, but doesn't connect that faith to Jewish religion.
Not only that, I would say sometimes he doesn't understand his faith as faith in a religious sense, not only a Jewish religious sense. Sometimes I argue with people. I'm not sure you'll agree with me, Mark, but often, I don't know if so often now, but in the past maybe sometimes you'd have people who say in Hebrew, I'll say it in Hebrew, help me remember it. Ani ma'amin ba'adam. And I don't believe in God, I believe in man. And I always think that if you say, I believe in man, what you're really saying is, I believe there's something about man which is more than his physical existence. If I believe in man as a moral creature, as a person with responsibility, with value, that means I'm saying he's not just an intellectual gorilla, a gorilla with a bigger brain. It's not all that it's about. So you call it, I believe in man, and I identify it as you're saying there's something intrinsic in mankind that's of value. Let's go check where that value comes from. If I tell you about God, you're going to say, we don't see God. That's nonsense. People used to believe in that because they didn't understand the power of nature. So they understood it to be something that somebody up there who's stronger than us is moving things around in the world and making rain and floods and earthquakes and all kinds of things like that because he's bigger and stronger. Now we have science. We understand why it's happening. We don't need God, but I believe in man. And maybe if I or someone could tell him, the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either, but let's discuss another option of what God is. Maybe that could be something that could deepen the understanding or the self-understanding of people or of generations. Eliezer.
I have a question
Yes.
about the English. Maybe the Hebrew will make it clearer.
Okay.
When it says,
Which paragraph?
second paragraph,
Yes.
exactly in the middle.
Yes.
Conveyed through words in a completely inverted way. Is the inversion the way the words are conveyed, or is the inversion the way it's understood by the person who uses it?
The Hebrew is, in English, it's they perceive the shades of meaning conveyed through the words in a completely inverted way. In Hebrew, it's קולטות את צל הגוונים שעל פי הדיבורים בצורה הפוכה לגמרי ממהותם. They perceive the words that are shadows of, that are faint, limited shadows of what there really is. They conceive of them in a way that it's opposite of their true essence. Yes, the English is good. What do you mean?
The way they perceive it and then completely, because it,
In
I
complete
thought it's
opposite
also
way.
the possibility that the words are conveyed in a inverted way, opposite to their essence. In other words, that somebody will tell you something which is inverted, and
I don't know. It's hard to say. Why do they perceive it opposite of its essence? Is it because their misunderstanding, or because the person conveying it to
Yeah.
them is misunderstanding,
Okay,
or not
I'm
presenting
saying
it
something.
properly?
Yeah, I'm saying something very explicit. It's a bit ambiguous. Your interpretation of it is exactly opposite of what I'm intending it to be. So
It could be either one. I'm not sure. It could be either one. And I think sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that. Okay. Let's move on to another paragraph, the third paragraph. 767, same day. Says HaRav Kook, sometimes a person may be harmed by books written by those of little or small faith, whose souls lack the sacred strength of the flame of holy, lofty fire. While books written by complete heretics, again defining it as we did before, filled with a defiant spirit of impure heresy, will bring him to self-correction and awaken his slumbering inner soul within him. And he will find himself filled with vitality and strength, with an abundance of supreme courage and a powerful, unwavering faith in the light of the living God. Wow. Again, I translated yetaknu oto from the Hebrew as will bring him to self-correction. So that's there in the middle. We'll bring him to self-correction. Yetaknu oto. We'll correct him, we'll heal him, or something like that. But the nice thing here is you have a book, for instance, you have the book by Spinoza. In English, do you use it as a shin or as a sin? Spinoza?
Spinoza.
Spinoza. In Hebrew, for some reason, we call him Spinoza. What?
That's probably.
Hebrew is correct?
That's
Okay. Okay. And we have a street on his name, in his name, not far from us. In any case, in the Jewish community in Amsterdam, he was excommunicated. He was considered a heretic because he said, Dia sive natura. Am I saying it correctly? The God is nature. And Jewish faith or Kabbalah says that that God reveals himself within nature, but he's also beyond nature. In Kabbalah, it's called Memale kol almin, filling all worlds, but also Sovev kol almin, meaning everything we see scientific, we see physical forms, and that is a revelation of God. But God is also beyond everything that we perceive, and not only is what we perceive. And so some people heard of Spinoza's books or read them or heard about what he was saying and said, he's a heretic, we must excommunicate him from the Jewish community. And then I have a friend who I will honestly, we think along similar wavelengths about these issues, and we can write to each other about them and discuss them and joke about, the way things we say, and other people will say, oh, that's heresy, but we understand them in a different way. And he told me he read Spinoza. He said, wow, I had a great religious experience. Meaning he read, I don't know if he agreed with Spinoza or not, but seeing godliness in nature can be a tremendous religious experience. And again, back to the book about my stroke of insight. You get to take off on the words, the title. She had a stroke, but rather than say it hit me and ruined my life, it gave me insight to understanding the experience of the brain. So it was my stroke of insight. So one person can say, oy vey, the way she wrote that chapter, instead of calling it God, she saw oneness, she called it this, she called it that. She used all kinds of terms from idolatry, from nations that they're from beliefs that are idolatry. Or you can say, it doesn't matter what words she used, her experience was when I read the book, when I read that chapter, also the other chapters about her recovery were fascinating. What she needed, how human connection, people to understand her, to be sensitive to understand. She writes the book, amongst other reasons, so that doctors will be sensitized to what people are experiencing when they're having a stroke. And you speak to them and you think they don't hear you, so you yell at them. That's not the problem. The problem is I'm hearing things too loudly or whatever. So that's one point of her book. But when she wrote this chapter about that feeling of oneness, I felt it was a great religious experience, and it didn't bother me what she calls it, but the oneness of the world that I experienced as a oneness with God, for me, is a religious experience. So sometimes there's a person who may be harmed by books written by religious people, understand themselves as to be people of faith, but their faith is small. Here, I'll give you an example. There's a rabbi who goes around Israel, gathers people in stadiums, like basketball stadiums, gives speeches about the punishments you're going to get in Gehinnom, in hell, and how you're going to boil in a pot like this or a pot like that, and if you don't keep Shabbat and all kinds of other things. And people get scared and they give out kippot and head coverings to the women and tzitzit, and people become religious. And then there are people who are turned off by what he's saying. So if a person, and then sometimes he allows you to ask him questions and argue with him, and I've seen videos or YouTubes on how he mocks people who argue with him. I think it's extremely disrespectful and not a nice presentation of religious faith. Now, there can be a person who goes to his speech and is turned off by him. But it's not because he's a negative person, it's because he's looking for something more pure. And if he reads a book by Spinoza, maybe he'll have a religious experience. But he won't identify it as such. And he won't identify God as being anywhere beyond nature. So you won't look for God in Torah and guidance to human beings. He'll just see God in nature, and he won't become a religious person. And we're missing him because we don't identify what's giving some people a religious experience and other people an anti-religious experience, and what for some people is heresy, and for other people is a gate into connection to God. Fascinating. Eliezer.
The two people who come to mind about this are Rousseau and Marx.
Rousseau
and Marx.
Please explain Rousseau and Marx.
Rousseau is one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, who was for the rights of man. He's one of the, he was revolutionary in advocating the rights of man.
But Ansel is saying about Rousseau that he was a revolutionary in advocating the rights of every human being, like the UN Declaration of Human Rights.
Just the right of people to rule themselves, rather than to be ruled by an outside force. And
I'm familiar a little bit with things he's written about education. Yeah. Okay.
And Marx.
It's all about it's about revolutions and power. Who has the power?
That social, again, that social force. The social force is more important than the national force.
But did either of them find any religion in their ideals?
Most was a Jew.
He was a Jew, but
wasn't practicing.
not a practicing.
I don't know. I mean, I never looked up his life, but
But is it possible? I don't know about Marx, but certainly in other I'll take for example communism. There were a lot of Jews in the Russian communist movement, and certainly they're coming from the DNA, the Jewish DNA of Tikkun Olam and equality and things like that. Of course, they identified it as being as far as possible from religion. They were not religious Jews, and I'm looking for a term. it's a bchia, it's like if I feel like crying over it because the ideas of equality, of not having, of not some people having all the money and other people not, things like that, very much Torah views. And why does it have to be against religion? Because religion is perceived in a certain way. And the religion becomes an issue of power. And some people have more power than others, so they decide what religion is like, and it pushes people away. So it's
I mean, who knows what Marx learned when he was a
yeah,
child?
okay. I'm thinking, I'm just following your cue. I'm taking it from Marxism to communism. Because it's easier for me to identify the Torah ideals within communism, even though it's gone so way out, communism, so way off the derech, as they say. Anyone else?
Yeah, there are still plenty of Jews that think communism is a good idea, unfortunately. A lot of them seem,
Communism is a good idea, it just can't work.
ah,
It's a good idea. It's not a good way to
well,
carry it out.
fortunately, we have an experiment about to be carried out in New York City, so we'll see.
Yeah.
I guess one of my questions, again, getting back to this definition of heresy and the harm that it may cause, uh, it almost sounds like to some people this is an all or none phenomenon. Either you follow everything that Judaism decrees, or you're a heretic, which I would reject that myself. Um, but how do we know that a book written by somebody of small faith is going to harm somebody? They may get an insight that down the road will be very helpful to them. Where do
I
these
don't think, go ahead.
no, where do the judgments come from? Because to me that's a judgment.
I think rather than judge it in advance, I think sometimes how do you react when you see it happening? You can have, they say about children growing up in the same home, they end up so different. What? You grew up in the same home? I always say no two children grow up in the same home. No such thing. Even, one is older, one is younger. That's two different perspectives. And even if they're twins, it doesn't matter. Each one has a different perspective on what was going on. You can have, or as someone taught me once, and I pass it on, as an educator or as a rabbi who's involved in religious education in Israel, is it right for a family to say, this is the school we want our children to go to? Maybe you have two different children that should be going to two different schools. Maybe one child needs something more of a more restricting and strong framework, and that's good for him. And the other one that's going to throw him way off, and you need for him something which is more gives more freedom and free choice or choices between different options. Each child can need different things. So maybe you have a book at home and one of your children reads it and says, oh, this is good. ABC does, and he follows things that he found in that religious book. And another one reads it and says, oh, this is terrible. This is nonsense. What is this? What is this terrible perspective, this terrible hashkafa? Because they're different. But if I see that it's possible, so when a child of mine or someone else in the world reacts to something in that way, I have the option of reacting to it rather than saying, oy vey, kfira, heresy, don't go that way. I have an option of reacting to him. It's very interesting that you see it that way. Let's look for a different book that will be good for you. Let's try and find a book. Let's ask someone, do they know of a book that would be right for his questions, that questions that this book raised within him? Help him grow from the experience of reading something that raised objection within him. Okay, let's not say you're rejecting the book, so we're rejecting you. No, let's say, okay, you're rejecting this attitude. Let's see how you can grow from that. So I'm saying that understanding Rav Kook's perspective is not, I'm not going to take a book in advance and say this is this or this is that. I mean, I did. I took the stroke of insight and I said, For some people, it might, but I'm not saying it's A or B. For someone, it might be a negative experience because rather than call it God, she calls it all kinds of other. She mentions God, but that's one of 8 options. But for me, I don't care what other names she called it. I identified it in my life and perspective and experience as God. So for me, it was a very deep religious experience reading her book. For someone else, he might be thrown off by it. So that's what I'm saying. When it happens, it gives us options of how to react to it and how to deal with it and what to suggest in a constructive way. And if you can do that as a family or as a parent, maybe we can do that as a nation. Maybe I think rabbis and religious communities can have an effect, can have a role in making a positive effect on how you react to people, the way people speak about, what they found unpleasant in religion and things like that.
What I'm getting from these 3 paragraphs and our discussion is that there's a desire here to integrate what the heretic, what a person is called a heretic. I'm not sure I understand the word yet, but that person really has a lot to offer, and should not be rejected. In other words, whatever that person is representing should be integrated in somehow in our discussion somehow, and can have the effect, even though that person is a heretic, it doesn't believe blah blah. But that can still, that person can have thoughts that are profound enough that it can stimulate a person who's not a heretic to become, as I said here, to become self-correcting and awakening in the inner soul. And so there's a utility to the heretic, or to integrate the heretic into the discussion. That's what I'm getting.
Yes, what Mark is saying is that there's something that we can utilize here. We can use it and make it more effective. And yes, it's too late now to do it, but we see that in later things that we'll get to maybe next time in 2 weeks. But yes, what you're identifying is correct, and therefore it can change our understanding of the processes that we're going through. And then maybe we can help the processes move along in a more constructive way. And maybe not only he's having, he grew up with some form of religious education, whether he grew up in a religious home with a religious education or just a kindergarten teacher told him Torah stories and things like that, and he got a childish perspective of what Judaism is. In any case, what we're saying is we can react, we rabbis can react to it in a way that will be constructive for him. But HaRav Kook will say also that he is doing something constructive for us because he is cleansing our understanding of faith. We need to let go of some things that have stuck themselves onto faith in a negative way, and we're not ready to let go of them. And he's forcing us to face it and cleanse and purify and make our faith more, and refine our faith. So yes, HaRav Kook will say both of those.
So the interaction with the heretic is a dialectic. It's not to convert the heretic; it's to learn from the heretic.
It's both,
and the heretic could become more enlightened in whatever way that we wish to define enlightenment, but we get something out of it. In other words, the dialectic of discussing with the heretic results in deeper understanding.
And
we don't throw the heretic onto the stake, because we would lose that if we did.
So there are 2 reasons why, or at least 2 reasons, maybe more, why we don't throw him on the stake. One is because he's what he's raising has truth to it. It's not total truth, but it has some truth to it, and we shouldn't just throw that out. And for him, maybe we can help him move along in the process and bring himself to a place that's more positive. And also because yes, we will lose something if we get rid of him. And another beautiful aspect of that is that very often when religious and non-religious people meet, they tell or they experience an experience where it's all or nothing. It's, it's I have the truth or I have the truth, and we're arguing, and we can't, there's nothing to discuss because I believe A and you believe B, and there's no meeting. And another option is, I don't have to totally change, but is there something about you? Yes, there's something I want to say to you. There's something I want to convince you or have an influence on you. But it doesn't mean that I have zero openness to being influenced by you. If you're going to turn me into a heretic, I don't want to be influenced by you, but I can listen to you and include in my own perspective of life something that I've learned from you without becoming a heretic. So we meet on some equal ground, and we can actually listen to one another and consider each other what the other one is saying, because maybe it will have some positive place in my life without becoming what the other one is.
This
Yes.
is all on the intellectual scale, which, I mean, in fact,
Not
these
only,
three things are-
not only, yes.
because
I've been presenting it that way, yes. But as I was saying, this is all on the intellectual scale.
Right. Ice cream, Heresy,
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard about that.
Yes.
And that's not going to convince, maybe you could say he's a heretic because he's serving ice cream on Shabbat. It's not going to bring him any closer to.
Absolutely not. It's caused people in Herzliya to say, I'm going to buy ice cream in that place because we're against this kind of violence. Yeah, but I'm saying not only in that way, you're right, it's not only intellectual. Sometimes it's about experience. For instance, if you experience religious people who keep the halakha and are sensitive people and are sensitive to beauty and nature and art or all kinds of things, and you see you're it's not the same as having a discussion with someone who says to you, religion does not necessarily mean that we disconnect from the world. That's intellectual. You're talking about it. If you spend time with a person like this, you happen to meet in the army or in university or is your neighbor, all kinds of things like that, then you sometimes experience that, wow, religion can see this beauty and that beauty, and it's different than what I thought before. Then maybe I don't have to be so disconnected from it. So that's also something that the experience can be positive or can be negative, of course. Okay, this was 3 out of 4. So we still have a fourth and an additional one and more to do next time.
One more quick comment that may or may not be so quick. I've been struggling as I'm listening, trying to figure out where is the real importance in what we're talking about. Is it with the individual? Is it with the teacher? But a very intelligent, influential person in a place of influence can take a false belief or a wrong belief and do very great harm to the world. And we've seen that over and over again in history. And we're seeing it today in our world. Certainly the conservative movement in the United States, which, up until a few weeks ago or a few months ago was solidly on the side of Israel. Suddenly there are voices there that are trying to drag the movement away from Israel.
No surprise, Michael. Sorry.
Okay. We'll have that discussion later. I said short time. But I also said they're wrong. So there you go. So yeah, this has a very practical side to it as well.
Yeah. But everybody who has, let's quote Spider-Man, okay? If you have power, with great power comes great responsibility. You can use your power or your influence. If you're an influential person, you can use your influence in a constructive way or in a destructive way. Sure.
So if you'll put some spidey thread around Mark until next time.
Good luck.
I'm gonna throw him over to you. Okay. לילה טוב.
תודה רבה, לילה טוב.
לילה טוב.